Little Red Riding Hood. There was once a sweet little girl who lived with her father and mother in a pretty little cottage at the edge of the village. At the other end of the wood was another pretty cottage, and in that one lived her grandmother. Everyone loved this little girl. Her grandmother perhaps loved her most of all, and gave her a red cloak with a hood which she always wore, so people called her Little Red Riding Hood. One morning, Little Red Riding Hood's mother said, "Put on your things and go and see your grandmother. She's been poorly. Take along this basket of cakes for her." Red Riding Hood was so happy. All around her grew pretty wild flowers which she loved so well, and she stopped to pick some. Little Red Riding Hood wandered from her path when from behind her a gruff voice said, "Good morning, Little Red Riding Hood." Little Red Riding Hood turned around and saw a great big wolf, but Little Red Riding Hood did not know what a wicked beast the wolf was, so she was not afraid. "What have you got in that basket, Little Red Riding Hood?" "Cakes, Mr. Wolf," she replied. "Where are you going with them, Little Red Riding Hood?" "I'm going to see my grandmother who's poorly, Mr. Wolf." "Where does your grandmother live, Little Red Riding Hood?" "Along that path, past the wild rose bushes, and through the gate at the end of the wood, Mr. Wolf." Then Mr. Wolf again said, "Good morning," and set off. And Little Red Riding Hood went on in search of flowers. At last he reached the porch covered with flowers and knocked at the door of the cottage. "Who's there?" called the grandmother. "Little Red Riding Hood," said the wicked wolf. "Press the latch, open the door and walk in," said grandmother. The wolf pressed the latch and walked in, where the grandmother lay in bed. He made a jump at her, but she jumped out of bed and ran into the closet. Then the wolf put on the cap which she had dropped and crept under the bedclothes. In a short while Little Red Riding Hood knocked at the door and walked in, saying, "Good morning, grandmother. I've brought you some cakes which Mum cooked this morning." As she came near the bed she said, "My, what big ears you have, grandmother." "All the better to hear you with, my dear." "Why, what big eyes you have, grandmother." "All the better to see you with, my dear." "But grandmother, what a big nose you have." "All the better to smell you with, my dear." "But grandmother, what a big mouth you have." "All the better to eat you with, my dear," he said, as he growled at Little Red Riding Hood. Just at that moment the woodcutter was passing the cottage, and he heard her scream. He rushed in and shot Mr. Wolf. Everyone was happy that Little Red Riding Hood had escaped the wolf. Then Little Red Riding Hood's grandma came out of the closet, and they lived happily ever after.